Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti in questa seconda giornata del Vintage Computer Club Italia che vi ha organizzato questo Vintage Computer Festival Italia nella seconda edizione. Iniziamo oggi la giornata dei lavori con il primo incontro con il signor Allan Alcorn. Carlo ci spiegherà e ci introdurrà questo nostro illustre ospite. Spero che l'intervento sarà interessante per tutti quanti e buona giornata.
Ciao a tutti, buongiorno, benvenuti. Allan Alcorn non avrebbe bisogno per molti di voi di presentazione, però ricordiamo che senza Allan Alcorn non avremmo il mondo che noi conosciamo come adesso, perché grazie a lui è stato il primo dipendente di Atari e Atari è stata la prima azienda a introdurre il videogioco nel mercato, a creare quello che noi consideriamo il mercato del videogioco nel 1972 con il videogioco Pong. Videogioco Pong che è stato ideato da Nolan Bushnell, fondatore e presidente di Atari, e progettato e costruito da Allan Alcorn, che è il primo dipendente di Atari, poi è diventato Chief Executive e ha seguito tutti i progetti di Atari, tra cui anche la produzione della console domestica Pong e poi del videocomputer system Atari VCS 2600. Lasciamo la parola a Alan che ci spiegherà le meraviglie di questa vita pionieristica. Grazie a tutti.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate people. Be careful, we don't unplug that. Appreciate people still honoring and respecting work that I had done over 40 years ago. I never expected that. And today I thought I would talk about how Atari came to be, how I happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right skills to do that, to create something that still has relevance today, much to my surprise. There we go. So this is a picture of me when I was about, I'm guessing 11, 12 years old. I always loved electronics and always had curiosity of how things worked. And my father enrolled me in a RCA correspondence course in radio and television repair. And so there I am building the first little breadboard with an old-fashioned soldering iron. And so that was one part. And my neighbor across the street owned a television repair shop. This is back in the days when it was all vacuum tubes, before transistors were in there. And I got to go down there when I was, 12, 13 years old and sit behind the counter and learned how to fix televisions and radios and made a little bit of extra money and learned about life. It was an old-fashioned television repair shop, and in the afternoon, most of the other guys were drunk, and they were playing, had a crap game, dice game playing in the back. So I got to run the whole shop. They were all in the back playing dice. And then when I was in high school, when I went to high school in San Francisco, I happened to be a football player. And I was a rather good football player. And that paid off big time because I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I didn't know what they really did, but I wanted to be one. And University of California at Berkeley, was one of the best places to go that I could afford to do that. So I, with the help of the football coach at Cal, got me into the campus, and I played football for Cal for 1 week. And I've had to decide, do I want to be an engineer or a football player? Because I can't do both. And so I chose engineering. I'm glad I did. So this is Berkeley in the 60s. Some of you may have heard there was a little conflict going on. There was Vietnam War was going on. And so one advantage to being a student at University of California was that you wouldn't get drafted to go to Vietnam. And plus, we were protesting the war in Vietnam, the bombing that was going on. And we organized, the engineering department organized itself to protest. And one of the places we went down the peninsula to Lockheed Missile and Space, where they were building weapons, and we did informational picketing as the employees came to work. And they said, well, if you look like a hippie, they're not going to listen to you. So there was this one guy who gave out free haircuts one day, and I figured, okay, I'm going to get a free haircut. And there's a picture of me doing it. And the reason that picture is there, it was a free haircut in a union barber shop, which was not good. Anyway, I got my free haircut. The press came, took my picture, and then they shut it down. But I made the front page of the paper for getting a haircut. So that's my first press. Then I got a job at Ampex. I don't know, most of you're familiar with videotape recording, although they don't do much of that anymore. But Ampex was the place that invented videotape. And I got to work there with some of the best video engineers in the world and got mentored. This picture shows one of the big videotape drives in the background that was special purpose. This part of Ampex that I worked at was called Video File. And it was a way to store documents on videotape. And it didn't take off, but it was a great testing ground, and that's where Nolan and Ted Dabney and many others that formed the first Atari were all working. This was back in the day when you worked at a company, a big company like Ampex. You're supposed to work their whole life, your whole employment life, and at the age of 65, you'd retire and get a gold wristwatch and a pension. And people were not starting their own companies. I didn't actually first time I ever heard the word entrepreneur, didn't know what that was. And being a ex-radical at Berkeley, I really didn't think much of capitalism. I was pretty naive. So Ampex started to have some trouble. Nolan Bushnell had left earlier to join a company, the only coin-operated game manufacturing company on the West Coast called Nutting Associates. And with Ted, he and Ted created the first coin-operated video game called Computer Space. And it was a copy of Space War that was done at MIT by Steve Russell and others. He made a cheap version that didn't run on a $1 million computer. It didn't do very well, but it was a start. And then he came and offered me a job. Said, Al, if you join us, quit Ampex, join us, and we'll give you $1,000 a month salary and 10% of the stock in the company. I thought the stock would be worthless. I didn't even know what that was really at the time. And $1,000 a month was less than I was making at Ampex, but the fun of working with some very bright guys and starting a company just seemed like, wow, this is really strange. I've never done that. And it'll be real exciting, and it will probably fail, and I'll go back to work at Ampex with better pay. That was what I kind of thought. And I was so young, I could easily take the risk, and my lovely wife went along with the gag, and we did that. And so Nolan understood the coin-operated business and marketplace because he had at University of Utah, where he went to school, in the summer ran a pinball arcade at an amusement park. So he understood the dynamics of the business and collections and all that. And that was very helpful because I knew nothing about that. Arcades back in those days were wonderful seedy places where women seldom went. And I thought they were fun and colorful, but they got rid of those. Now they're all pretty. There's a picture of Space War, the first Space War run on a PDP-1 computer. And the problem with that, the Space War game was so much fun and so used that everybody that had a PDP-1 computer, and indeed in those days they were about $1 million in today's money, everybody had Space War. And the companies tried to get the employees to stop playing the game. But it was very popular, and that's what Nolan saw. And he saw, if I could put a coin slot, if I could charge for a quarter, I could make a lot of money off of that. That's what the world needs. Well, he did it, and it didn't really. Oh, and he was going to use a Data General Supernova mini computer to run it. That was his plan, but they cost, at that time, they cost $2,000 or $3,000, and there's no way the economics would work. And he thought, well, maybe I could use one computer to run 10 games at the same time. And as he tried to develop that, the computer really wasn't fast enough to do anything at video speeds. He had to do more and more in hardware. And he told his wife to buy 2 of these computers. And she thought it was really crazy, so she never sent the check. And by the time Nolan got to this far, he realized he didn't need the only thing the computer was doing was giving some simple commands up, down, left, right. And he could do that in logic and didn't need the computer. So the computer went away. But if you think back, what we were doing was taking the leading edge technology, computer technology of the day, and applying it to the entertainment business. And so it was fun. We knew the technology and he knew the entertainment business. So that was sort of the plan. This is a picture of the first team. You can see me on the far side when I had hair on top of my head and it was dark. That's Ted Dabney. There's Nolan in the polka dot shirt. And I'm at the end with pencils in my pocket so you could tell I was the engineer. This is the actual building where Syzygy Atari got started. Not very big. And when we started it, there were 3 of us. Ted Dabney, Nolan Bushnell, and myself. And then Nolan hired his babysitter, who was 18 years old, just high school. After school, she would come by and be our secretary. And she would answer the phone. And she was under instructions that if anybody wanted to talk to Nolan, that she had to make them wait for a minute or two to make it seem like we had a bigger company. Nolan told me that he had a contract from General Electric to build a home version of a ping pong tennis paddle game. And I thought, wow, okay, all right. And he said it was going to be a home game, so it meant it had to cost less than $25 in parts. And I wasn't sure how that was going to work, but okay, I'll just try to build the game and we'll see what happens. So as I built the prototype, it started taking more and more chips. When it was finally done, it was about 70 chips in there. And the chips cost, the TTL chips in those days cost us about 25 cents a piece. So it was already going to be over budget. It was a failure from the standpoint of a General Electric home game. But nobody from General Electric ever wrote us a letter or called or came by. And I was too young. I was 24 years old out of college, so it didn't figure out that this was a lie that Nolan was telling me. He was giving me the simplest game he could think of. He didn't think it would be popular, but he wanted me to practice to get the gist of how to make any kind of a video game. And then he was going to give me the real game, which I think was going to be a driving game. Well, I tried to make this little simple game work as best I could to be fun with the speed up of the ball and some of the different angles. And but I was kind of a failure because it was too many parts. Nolan didn't seem to mind. And then at one point he said it had to have sound. And I figured, oh my goodness, Nolan, I'm done with this thing. And I don't have, and Nolan said, I want the sound of a crowd of people cheering. And I had no idea how to do that with digital logic. So I just said, okay. And I went back to the bench and poked around for a couple of hours and found signals inside the circuit in the vertical sync counter that made pleasing sounds and piped them out. And I said, there it is, Nolan. And Nolan said, it's not what I asked for. Well, I said, if you want it, here's the tools. You can do it yourself. Nolan said, okay, forget it. Leave it there. Leave it that way. So that's the actual prototype. That's the first Pong machine. And I didn't think anybody would play it for a couple of... Well, we just took my wire wrap. You can see over at the far end that mess of wires. It was never meant to do anything but prove that I could make it work at all. And over the weekend, Ted built this cabinet. You'll notice how I bought a Hitachi television, black and white, from the drugstore. We slapped a coin mechanism, a coin box from a kiddie ride on the side, and we had to come up with a name, and somehow we came up with Pong, because it was very simple to spell and read. And you'll notice that there's a coin box, there's no instructions, just the word Pong and two knobs. Well, who would play this thing? So we put it, Nolan said, we'll put it out in a bar, a local bar that we knew, we were friendly with, and put it out there on a barrel to see who would play it. And a couple of guys came up and played it. And I was pleased that they did that. They seemed to enjoy it. Nolan said, what do you think of it, guys? And one guy said, oh, I know the guys who built this thing. Oh, yeah, right, sure, okay. Save it for the ladies. You'll notice the stick holding the TV set in, really well crafted. It wasn't going to last very long. And, of course, the problem was we put it out on location to see who would play it, and in a week or so, it stopped working. And the bartender called us up and told us that I, after work, went over to fix it. And what I would do is open up the coin box and give myself a free game to see what was wrong with it. Well, when I opened the coin box, all these coins poured out. So I picked them up, put them in my pocket, put the coins back. The next day, I went into work and went to Nolan's desk and put the coins on the desk, and I said, there's the problem. The darn thing is making too much money. Nolan goes, maybe we won't throw this one away. Now you got to understand, oops, wrong way. We didn't have any money. Unlike today, you go find an angel or a venture capitalist to give you a few $1 million. The banks wouldn't even give us a line of credit because, well, we were in the coin-operated entertainment business. This is vending machines, cigarette machines, and it was kind of a mafia business where bad people would fight over territory and all that. And so we're not going to give you guys money. You guys must be crooks. So we didn't get any money. There were no VCs interested, and there were very few venture capitalists, VC venture capital. in 1972, there was just a handful. But we were fortunate. There was a place in Silicon Valley that could make cabinets for us that were very good. And we got the cabinets, and I laid a board out. I had a board laid out, and that's a picture of one of the first Pong boards. I started the design in June of '72, and by December, we were shipping Pong games. The design was finished in 3 months, the electronics. So all it had was a $75 black and white TV set, a bread pan for coins, and it was very simple, very primitive, but it worked. And you'll notice a subtle thing about this brochure, or tear sheet. It says Pong, Atari Corporation, Syzygy engineered, SYZYGY. And we originally, our company was named Syzygy, but we couldn't use that name, so Atari was the second choice. And eventually we dropped it. But if you look at the room, and there's a real original Pong board in there, on it you will see Syzygy name on that board. If all else fails, we could go back to Syzygy. Well, we had to create a manufacturing organization, and we were copied. This was the thing that surprised me. It was a hit game. Everybody wanted it. We could not make them fast enough. We couldn't make them fast enough. We didn't know how to manufacture. It was a crazy time. But people were copying it all of a sudden, and that surprised me. And these companies that were copying it previously made pinball machines, and they didn't really understand electronics or what they were doing, but they put the parts in and copied them, and we really couldn't stop them. I then personally, after that, designed 2 games, Gotcha and Space Race. Neither one of them did that well. People liked the ball and paddle games, so we made a lot of variations on that. We also opened up a research group up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, about a 3-hour drive, 4-hour drive from where our office was, which was good because these were some smart ex-Ampex engineers, Steve Mayer and Larry Emmons, and they could work in quiet without distraction because the factory was constant chaos, and I was putting out fires everywhere, and they could think for the future. Nolan and I argued a lot. This is the original corporate logo letterhead, Syzygy. We were too cheap to buy new letterhead that said Atari. This was written in August of '73, so the Atari was less than 1 year old. And Nolan made a list of all these things he wanted. He wanted a bunch of new video games, a big staff of people. Item 6 on this list was a color modulated home version of Pong. Item 6. And I think, wait a second. That's a new industry. A home version of a video game. Yeah, sure. How hard could that be? So I replied to him saying, is the fact that we have no money a good reason for not doing this? And Nolan, you can see, he just wrote on my memo, no, and sent it back to me. So, okay, I said, I'll go give it a try. I'll try doing this home chip cut, because we knew we had to put the whole game on a single chip, and I didn't know how to do that. I had no idea, but I did hire a guy that did, Harold Lee. And I figured, well, I'll see how far I get, and when it fails, I'll just tell Nolan, I told you so. I couldn't do this. Well, that was Nolan. I would never have done this. This crazy man wasn't telling me to do it. So, what happened was, much to my surprise, and with my wife's help, I'm going to go ahead a little bit here. There. That's the prototype of the home Pong. game. The wire wrap board is much neater than anything I built because my wife did the wire wrap. Harold Lee and I did the logic and the schematic, and this was the first demo unit that we had. We didn't have the case, the plastic case. That's a wooden mock-up of what the case was going to look like if we could ever get it made. And this is a case we took around to Sears and Roebuck to show them. So, at one point, Nolan decided to replace all the executives with people from Hewlett, B players, second-rate team from Hewlett-Packard, and they managed to screw everything up. Sales plummeted, and the company almost went out of business. But we managed to put it back together, and that's when the driving game Grand Track, if you're familiar with that game, came out. And that resurrected, that saved the company. And then we got venture capital to help us. We actually did get venture capital from Don Valentine at Sequoia Capital, one of the biggest firms at the time. And so we did so I decided to I was a VP of engineering. I didn't like it. I didn't like being a manager. I wanted to be an engineer. So I took on this custom chip project for the home version of Pong, gave coin-op to another guy who wanted the job, and proceeded to get the chip to work, which surprised the heck out of me because I didn't think it was going to work. We had it fabricated at AMI, a semiconductor company there, and we plugged the chip in to the test fixture, and it worked. And I was shocked. And we had no plan. Most companies would have a plan. We're going to sell it here. We're going to distribute. No, we didn't. I think nobody believed we were going to get it to work. Well, we got it to work, and now we had to scramble to get a customer. And there was no consumer electronics being done in Silicon Valley at that time. So we just called up Sears, which is a big company in Chicago, had a very tall building, and they knew more about the product and its potential than we did. There's one guy, Tom Quinn, one buyer in sporting goods, and he was fabulous, and he gave us an order. He said, "How many do you think you could build this year?" I think we said 50,000, and he gave us a contract for 150,000. We were shocked, but then Nolan said, I want to sell it to other companies besides Sears. If Sears stops buying it, the company will fail. So we took it to the toy fair in New York. And when we were there, we showed it to all the buyers from Macy's, Montgomery Ward's, all the big stores. We did not sell one unit. And I was shocked. I thought, my God, this is going to be a failure. If it fails, our company is over. What I learned what that was these executives in these big companies, they just see the world as it is, not what it could be. And they don't want to take a risk. Because if they just do their job the same way they did last year and maybe made 10% more money, they'd get a little raise. But if they took this on and it failed, they'd get fired. So so thank goodness that Sears did it. So you'll see the first version of the home Pong says Telegames on it, not Atari, Telegames, and that was the brand name that Sears had come up with. And the product was a huge success. And now this one here, this prototype is the one we took to Chicago, to convince the executives at Sears that they should do this for us. And at one point, so this, as you may know, put out a signal that you'd hook to the antenna on your television set. Tune your television set to channel 3. Which was kind of an unused channel on the West Coast. And I had a television they loaned us from Sears there on a cart. I hooked it up. It wasn't going to work. There was all this interference. And I discovered they broadcast from channel 3 on the top of the Sears building I was in. So I had to open the bottom of this box up while the marketing guy did a presentation and retune it to channel 4 to get it to work, closed it up, did the demo, how it works. And these old executives from Sears, this one guy, Carl Lind, looked at me and he said, "Oh, Mr. Alcorn, you're telling me that you're going to take that rat's nest of all those wires and put it on a little piece of silicon the size of your little fingernail?" I go, "Yes, sir." He said, "How are you going to solder the wires to it?" And I think, well, my goodness, I'm in the wrong place here. I could. So we got over that. They did it. There's the Sears Telegames. You can see it says Telegames on the top. And it was the best thing that ever happened to us. We designed the chip ourselves. Back in 1973, you didn't do that. If you wanted a chip, you had to go to a semiconductor company and they would design it for you at great cost. And now, when you bought them, you could only buy it from that company, so they could charge whatever they wanted. And we designed it so it would run in anybody's factory, and so we could move it around and get a better price. At one point, we asked Intel, this is in 1973, "Would you build this chip for us?" And they were shocked, because no one, I think, had ever asked Intel to build our chip, our design, in their factory. And I said, "Well, I know it'll work in your factory because I know some of your engineers, and we know it'll run there." So one day I was at work, and Bob Noyce, Andy Grove, and Gordy Moore show up on the doorstep to see who the heck is this company asking us to build this. This is outrageous. And they looked around and they decided, "No, we're not going to build it for you." And I thought that these guys are smart, because we were not paying much money at all. And then once we got the thing going, all the other semiconductor companies realized, hey, here's a place we can sell semiconductors. We're going to make video games. The National Semiconductor, General Instruments, and others were trying to make game chips, copying Pong. And in fact, General Instruments was pretty popular. Some of you guys I talked to actually got one or two of those chips and made your own video games out of it. Our strategy to stop General Instruments was to just buy up all the chips, their entire production, and throw them away. Didn't work. Couldn't pull that off. Then it became clear that every new game that came out after that, we had to make a new chip. And that took about 6 months. And that was an unsustainable business plan. We knew we had to have a console that had a microprocessor and a cartridge, the software in the cartridge. And that was, and I must say, we were not the first. Fairchild Semiconductor with Channel F had a unit that did just that. The problem was Fairchild was a semiconductor company, and all the semiconductor companies had their own microprocessor. And they were bad, they were garbage. And so the game wasn't very good. Plus, they used all kinds of memory in it, and they cost a lot of money. But they were the first, and they proved it could be done, so we could not say it could not be done. The people, our team at Grass Valley, Steve Mayer and Ron Milner, came up with a design architecture for what became the VCS that used the 6502 microprocessor, which was the best, fastest, and cheapest processor at the time, way better than anything Intel had or Motorola, and it was cheap. But we built a system that had no memory in it. It had 256 bytes of memory, of RAM, and the cartridge was 2,000 bytes, 2K. And we would, the chip, the microprocessor was so powerful we could do 2 lines of video at a time. So there were only 3 or 4 chips in the whole VCS compared to the competing designs, which had 12, 15, 20. And our system was more flexible. It wound up being a better product because of that. Then around that time, well, as we started building the VCS, we knew we were going to need a lot of money because you had to buy all the parts in the first part of the year to supply the games that only really sold in the last 3 months of the year at Christmas. So it was a big risk, and we needed to have something. So we looked around, tried to go public, did a public stock offering, did not work. We couldn't do that. Finally, we found Warner Communications, and I remember, because this was now 1976, and Nolan and Joe Keenan, who was the president, Nolan was the chairman of the board, they went back to Warner in New York on the corporate Warner jet, and came back, and all of a sudden held a staff meeting in Nolan's hot tub in his house in Los Gatos. It wasn't uncommon to hold staff meetings in a hot tub back in those days for us. And they told us that Warner was going to buy us for about $30 million. And I was flabbergasted because I was just waiting for the company to blow up. Every year we risked the whole company, and all of a sudden there was some money in this. It was a very strange feeling, I must tell you. And when Warner bought us, they thought we were wonderful for a couple of years. But after a while, you guys are crazy. You don't know, you're just erratic. You're not straight-laced like we are. So they kicked Nolan out and replaced him with a guy named Ray Kassar, who came from Burlington Industries back east, understood nothing about semiconductors, electronics, startup companies, games, never played games. I mean, and he was the executive and proceeded to piss off most of the engineers. It became, in fact, he got quoted in a paper saying that, oh, the engineers are just a bunch of high-strung prima donnas. I know these kind of guys, design towels, no big deal, they're easy to replace. Well, that's not true. And of course, once that quote came out, we had a t-shirt made within a week that said, just another high-strung prima donna engineer from Atari, and everybody was wearing them. And Ray had to wear one to look cool with us. And then Atari finally died. It just, what happened was the good engineers, the good software programmers realized that the work they were making, 20 to 30,000, maybe 40,000 a year in salary, but they knew that the cartridges that they designed in 3 months were selling, we were selling 1 million of these things, and they weren't getting anything from it. And they asked for a few cent royalty for every cartridge. Ray would not do that. Well, so the best engineers quit and went and formed their own company, and they started up, and that was Activision. And Activision made better games than we did. And so we only had the second string engineers left, the good ones that all were leaving to make a lot of money. And Ray Kassar realized he had made a terrible mistake, but by then it was too late. And then what happened with, you may have heard of the E.T. cartridge. Steven Spielberg had this movie called E.T. Extraterrestrial. And unbeknownst to us, and even the president, Ray Kassar, Steve Ross cut a deal with Steven Spielberg for the name E.T. on a video game cartridge for a mere $20 million. And he calls up Ray and said, hey, I got you the name E.T., go build a cartridge and pay him $20 million. And, well, and we had no time left to do it either. And one of the best engineers there, it would take normally 3 months. He needed it in like 6 weeks. So he made the game, and because Ray never played games, he never played the game, who would have realized it was unplayable. It was a terrible, terrible game. But we knew how many we had to manufacture because we had to pay Steven Spielberg $20 million. So we needed to make like 5 millions of these to get enough royalties to pay Steve Spielberg. So we had all these things, and now only one problem. Nobody bought them. They didn't work. They didn't sell. And about that point, the whole thing collapsed. And then to hide their mistake, they decided to bury the video game cartridges in a landfill down in Los Alamos. And there's a movie about that. Anyway, the consumer electronics stuff got sold to Jack Tramiel, and the coin-operated side of our business got sold to Namco, and that ran on for several years. But the Tramiel story was different, didn't last. Anyway, so let's talk about Apple. Back in 1973, I happened to hire a very young hippie teenager who, well, there's a job application. Now, this was back in 1973, and this is our formal application to come to work at Atari. And it's hard to read. The name on the top is Steve Jobs, all written in lowercase, no capital. He went to Reed College, which was a English literature college. And it said access to transportation. He said possible but not probable. His car never worked, but he did have a driver's license. I said, well, you know, this guy's cheap. A hippie, teenager, all he needed was a technician. He's not an engineer. And he had so much enthusiasm. And I think there's real importance to having enthusiasm when you're doing anything. And so even if he's a tech, and some might argue that Steve had perhaps a little bit too much enthusiasm. But I like that. The engineers were not thrilled. Steve didn't bathe very often. He had weird ideas about food. And so the way he solved it, he would come to work at night when the engineers weren't there. And his buddy Steve Wozniak, who was working at Hewlett-Packard, would come over and play with him at our place because we were building all these coin-op video games in the back, and Woz is a big game fan, so he could play all night long with this stuff. So that's how I hired Steve, and he went off to meet his guru at one point. He told me, Al, I want to go see my guru in India. I said, great. Right, if you get work. And when he came back, he was wearing a saffron robe, shaved head, barefoot, and he said, Al, can I have my job back? I said, sure, come on back. And at that time, he and his buddy Woz had this crazy idea for a home computer. And he offered us the opportunity to buy it, to own it at Atari. And I told the president, I said, you know, I'd want one, but there's no software. You have to write your own software. There's no market. So we passed on it, and I helped Woz design some of the circuitry in the Apple II, the color, high-res color graphics. And Steve Jobs offered to let me buy founder stock in Apple. And I said, nah, I'll take a free computer. I'd rather have that. I could use the free computer. If I had taken the founder stock, it would be a different story. Anyway, eventually, I went to work at Apple after Atari went in around 83. After they kicked Steve out of Apple, they offered me a job as an Apple Fellow, which was really strange. I wasn't sure what a fellow was supposed to do, and they weren't either. That sounds good, and their pay was really great. And I found out later that one of the definitions they had, where a vice president is supposed to add new product lines to the company. But an Apple Fellow is supposed to change the industry. I go, oh, I like that. I like disrupting industries. And I got a chance to do that. The first product I worked on was a Trojan horse, called a Trojan horse. It was a Macintosh on a plug-in card for a PC, and it would turn a PC into a Mac. And you could run both PC and Mac at the same time, or differently. And you could do Mac in your office. When the boss wasn't looking, you hit a key, it would turn back quickly into an MS-DOS screen, so the boss didn't think you were doing the wrong thing. Anyway, Apple wouldn't sell it. They didn't think I could make it work. They only gave me 3 people, and I had to lie, cheat, and steal to get copies of the ROM. But then they had me put on a project that was fabulous. Multimedia in those days was a Apple computer with this monitor and a Laserdisc, Pioneer Laserdisc with its television monitor. And the Apple would control the tracks on the disc. But you had to burn a Laserdisc special to make this work. It was very clumsy. And I said, well, let's just put data in, digitize all that stuff in the computer. And the technology wasn't quite there yet, but we knew it would be. The good news was that John Louis Gasset and John Scully said it was a stupid idea, would go nowhere, so he left me alone, and we managed to put a team together with some of the finest scientists, and we had this Cray computer that nobody was using anymore, and we proceeded to develop the very first beginnings, the very first MPEG player and video, and hence disrupted an industry. To this day now, talk about disrupting, the internet is clogged with videos of puppies and kittens and stuff like that. I never envisioned that would happen, but that was very exciting to do that, because when people tell you something can't be done, one of 2 things, they're right or they're wrong. And if they're wrong, it's kind of fun when you prove everybody else a fool. I then later on started, I did many companies I could talk about. Most of them failed, but they were fun. Learning experiences. One of the more fun ones was a company called Silicon Gaming, which started in '93. Angel funded it, a gentleman named Dave Morse. He funded the Amiga and 3DO. Knew him, he's a really good guy, and he put $1 million in. I put a team together, and we made a modern slot machine. Prior to this, all slot machines were reels, 3 reels spinning behind a glass. And we thought that should be entertainment. So we put a big 16:9 CRT portrait mode, and we used an Intel motherboard for the logic and the hardware, and had a 2 gigabyte hard disk with all the graphics and content on it, and we put public key cryptography in it to authenticate, and we went public. We had Kleiner Perkins was our venture capital firm, and we did a public offering and raised about $10 million, and but it was very tough selling, and it's a long story, and we were about 5 years too soon, but the technology changed the industry, and today all the slot machines are pretty much video and rely on the use of the Alcorn patent that I don't get a penny out of, but hey. And then I got to work at Interval Research, which was funded by Paul Allen, and it had about 100 of the smartest guys in the technology industry, and me hanging around looking at these. And I had experience at starting companies, and all these PhDs were wonderful, but they knew nothing about starting a company. And I pulled out and started a company with Zowie, and a guy you may know, Lee Felsenstein, was with me on that. He was at Interval, and he helped me do this chip. We started a company called Zowie, which was a child's play set that hooked to a video game on your PC. And so the video game responded to the motions, and we had to have a tracking system to track all these pieces. And it was a technical success, but once again, the toy industry, it's very difficult to sell good stuff. They're not really interested in what's good for kids or they like. It's what, if you've got the ET name on it, if you've got Space War on it, because toys are sold at Christmas where grandparents look at a product and see, oh, Mickey Mouse, and they just buy it. That's what happens. There's no, the quality of the game doesn't count. So anyway, that got sold to Lego. And then, there's the button. Finally, what I do today, I'm retired, and I do mentoring with young people, and so does Lee Felsenstein, the same thing. And it's fun to give back, and I'm trying to get young people to have enthusiasm for something. So one day every few months, we hold this thing called Hack the Future, where these young kids come in, and we don't teach them anything. We just do it. And as they stumble, we mentor them. And it's a mentoring experience, which we think is very important. And it's very rewarding to me to see the look on a young kid that has built a video game or a web page, something he didn't think he could do. And he created himself. He could take it home and show it off to others. So that's what I'm doing today, these days. And I'm enjoying life, and thank you very much for having me here. Any questions?
Là in fondo, ok. A question from Lisa Lu. Another.
This is just an off-the-cuff question, but if you'd like a copy of that, another prima donna from Atari, I have the T-shirt, and I'll model it for you and send you the picture.
Oh, thank you. Yes, the T-shirts were very popular.
Thank you very much. There's a...
Two questions, if possible. The 6502 was made by Chuck Pendle, no, and when you use it, it was just made by Commodore.
Go ahead.
And because nobody knows if Chuck Pendle made the 6502 for Commodore or just for the people, and that the people use, like Apple VCS and Commodore 2, or it was built inside the Commodore and then sell out.
No, here's what happened. Chuck Pendle was working at Motorola on the 68.
La traduco come domanda perché magari.
Okay. Chuck Pendle was working at Motorola on the 6800 and was on that design team. And he's an excellent engineer, and he came up with the idea for a concept, a little technical here, pipelining and page zero, which they did not have in the 6800, but it was essentially a 6800 with those two things added in that made the part run about 4 times faster in some applications, at the same clock rate. And Motorola, as an engineering manager, sometimes you just have to shoot the engineer and ship the product, because you can keep adding features and it will never ship and you've got a business. And Chuck wouldn't take that. So he quit, went to a company back in Philadelphia called MOS Technology. And they proceeded to build a 6502, and then we all saw it at the West Coast Computer Fair where they had a barrel of these parts. And when the 6800 was selling for like $75 or $100 a chip, they were selling these for $10, $20 a chip, and they were better. Okay, fine. I go back there, I'm talking to them, and Steve Jobs had discovered this thing. Woz discovered this. We discovered it. But MOS Technology was run by some brilliant engineers, but bad businessmen. And they were selling watch chips and calculator chips to Commodore Chuck Peddle. And Chuck Peddle was the kind of guy who didn't pay his bills. If he could, he just wouldn't pay you. And you had to stop shipping to get him to pay. These guys kept shipping. I went back there one time to talk to them, and they said, oh, by the way, Al, would you please buy our company? MOS Technology, $1 million. I said, wow, this would be great. I go back to Atari and say, hey, let's buy this semiconductor company. The Warner guys had some sense that, no, you're not doing that. You clowns can't barely run this company. So, okay, we didn't do it. And what happened was the company tanked. Chuck Peddle, and Chuck bought the company to recover, just canceled his own debt. So now Chuck Peddle owned the company. Okay, and they were using it for the Commodore later. We were using it before. And at one point, I'm designing this. We have a small design team with Jay Miner. We're designing the chips for Stella, for this thing. And the president comes in and says, let me understand this, Al. This new product that's going to, the whole company is risking, our VCS 2600, is going to rely on a microprocessor that's sole sourced to Jack Tramiel? I said, yeah. He said, no, it's not. We're not going to do that. So I went back to MOS Technology and said, how many of these parts do you think I'll buy? Would you like me to buy from you this year? And they said, like 50,000? And I said, I'll give you a hard purchase order for 50,000 pieces, guaranteed, on the condition you have a second source in the West Coast with the company that I knew, Synertech. So what happened was we bought the 50,000 from Commodore, or from MOS Technology, that was now pretty much owned by Commodore. And I bought 1 million from Synertech. So that's how the sources came out. And that's how that, so in the next 2 years, between Apple and Atari, we were the largest users of microprocessors of any kind in the world for a couple of years with that part.
And the second question is the story about the video chip or VCS, the name.
Oh, Stella?
Yes.
Stella, that was named after, unlike most of the names of our projects before, no one would name them after pretty ladies in the company. But this one was named after the bicycle that Ron Milner hung in the cubicle, which had a big name on the side that said Stella. So they said, we got to have a code name, Stella. That's all it was, yeah. Yeah. The stories get better and better with age. And, yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah. Some of the stories are better than the truth. Most of them aren't, but it's neat to have people making up stuff.
Qualche altra domanda? Qualcuno? Ah, okay.
How much money did you offer Steve Jobs when you hired him? Do you remember?
God, no. That's a good question. It wasn't much. It wasn't much. It was probably $1,000 a month, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, he had. Yeah, I remember when he was starting up. These guys were 18 years old. They didn't have a credit card. So I get a call one day from Steve saying, Al, would you help me? The guys at Synertech, I have to buy, they were buying, the early Apple computers were chips from Atari, TTL chips, because they couldn't get a trade account to buy stuff. So we would sell them the parts at 10% over cost, cash up front. We didn't trust these guys. So, but the microprocessor, no. So he called me up and said, could you introduce me to the guys at Synertech? I can talk to them. They don't even talk to me. So I said, okay. I called up my friend Jack over there, and he said, okay. And after a week or two, he called back and said, hey, Al, that was the funniest meeting I've had in a long time. These two kids come in. One is this hippie, and this other one is this Wozniak, and they started arguing about prices and stuff, and eventually they said, look, we'll sell you, I don't know, 1,000 or something, and we'll give you, you better pay us in 30 days or we cut you off, and we'll start. Okay. And that's how that happened. And that, again, became one of the biggest trade accounts they ever had. But it was funny because the Steves had trouble since they were so young. You know, you couldn't even rent a car, let alone get a trade account. No, a business, yeah. But yeah, let's start somewhere.
Qualche altra domanda? Fine? Thank you very much. And,
Okay.
so,